It is within the framework of the Cool Coalition that experts from around the world are developing a joint NCAP methodology that looks at cooling in a comprehensive manner to ensure growing cooling demand can be met more sustainably in countries around the world. This process is supported by KSEP, a philanthropic collaborative that helps developing countries transition to energy efficient, climate friendly, and affordable cooling solutions. The speakers with us today will tell us more about this and will highlight the importance of national cooling action plans when planning comprehensive cooling action. Let me start by introducing you to Dan Hamza Goodacre, the non-executive director of KSEP and the cooling lead at the COP26 Champions team. Dan, can you tell us why existing NCAPs, about them and why they're important?
Hi, Laurie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I have an echo. Does everyone else have an echo?
No, I can hear you fine, Dan.
Okay, fine. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you also to Sophie and the UN Cool Coalition team for setting up the webinar today. And I would just say congratulations to the Ozone Secretariat for making the MOP happen during these very challenging times, because, well, the work must go on. My main message today is that if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Now, you all know that cooling means much more than just the refrigerant gases that are regulated by the Montreal Protocol. You know that cooling impacts on much of what we do daily, and that cooling also impacts on many parts of government. And this is a long list. I started writing it down, but impacts on ministries of health, it impacts on ministries of education, ministries of agriculture, ministries of work and the economy, treasuries, ministries of energy, ministries of climate change and the environment, etc. I'm sure I've missed some out, ministries of transport. And that means that countries need to take a whole of government approach to cooling. They need whole of government plans. These plans must go beyond the HPMPs. They're more than just refrigerant plans. And they need to be informed by the science and by economics and by the politics of equity. And we'll hear a bit from Brian later on today. And I look forward to hearing from the other experts about the best methodologies that we can employ collectively to underpin these cooling plans. And I also look forward to hearing from a very good friend of mine, from Mazen Hussein from Lebanon, from a country that's already showing leadership in having published its national cooling plan, and that leadership, frankly, even more extraordinary given the challenges that Lebanon faces. Other countries have also put some of these plans out already, which is great to see, and you know, some countries with pretty significant cooling challenges, such as India. Countries that are producing the most cooling technology, such as China, others such as Rwanda and Trinidad and Tobago. And the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme is very pleased to be supporting around another 20 countries who are also writing their national cooling plans. And there's been a little bit of a delay because of COVID, which has disrupted much of the work that we do, but we're looking forward to seeing these plans come to fruition in 2021. And they already show how to take a more comprehensive and national approach to cooling. And they also show how to think in the longer term, which is absolutely what we need. As emissions rise and as climate change worsens, temperatures also rise. And so our challenge of addressing cooling needs becomes even more important. So these plans have to be urgent and ambitious, and they need to inform the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. Now, the good news is that the race is on. The race to net zero emissions, hopefully you've all been paying attention, particularly this year, despite the turbulence, there's been some great progress in the race to zero. Over 80 countries now have committed to net zero. Over 2,000 businesses and investors, cities, states and regions, I think actually, collectively, these countries and non-party stakeholders cover something like 50% of global GDP. And more are going to follow, notably the United States. Biden has said he will make a commitment to net zero. That's going to mean all of the G7 countries have made a commitment to net zero as we race towards Glasgow at the end of next year. And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for many of you in the Montreal Protocol community? It means that the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol is necessary but not sufficient. Net zero means that we need to adjust the Kigali Amendment to go further and faster. So a quick plug here from me, shameless plug. Please do look out for the forthcoming pathway to net zero cooling that's coming out from the COP26 high-level champions team and Cool Coalition partners. And please do what you can to help get national cooling plans written and implemented. As I said at the start, if we fail to plan, we are basically planning to fail. So thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to hearing from everyone today.
Thank you so much, Dan. Let's move now to Mazen Hussein. Mazen is the head of the National Ozone Unit of Lebanon. Lebanon launched its NCAP this year with the support of the United Nations Development Program and NCAP. Mazen, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us more about the goals and the process behind Lebanon's NCAP?
Good. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen and friends. Actually, I'm very pleased to be present in this webinar, and I would like to extend my appreciation to the group for organizing this event in these difficult days. I wish you all to stay safe and healthy. Actually, we in Lebanon know the growing needs of cooling and necessities in defining cooling priorities in order to reduce energy-related emissions from cooling and energy consumption in the country. Those needs were translated into a national cooling plan for Lebanon that was completed in September 2019, where I actually identified the pathway forward in meeting our future national targets, the Montreal Protocol, Kigali Amendment, and Paris Agreement goals and commitments. However, unfortunately, the NCP report is not officially published due to several reasons in the country. Through the implementation plan of the NCP, we followed actually around 6 main objectives in developing this plan, mainly through setting a methodology, a market survey, and identifying the numbers of appliances in use, emissions mitigation scenarios, development of policies such as maps, labels, test standards, and assessment of funding and financing schemes, as well integrating the NCP into our Lebanon NDCs. During the preparation of during the implementation of the work, the methodology was set to cover the rack inventory data was established, all the related cooling activities, the critical use parameters for each appliance type was identified, emissions from the rack sector were estimated, adding energy and refrigerant emissions. As well, we identified the number of rack appliances, sales trends, sales and stock projections, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions, and we did identify the mitigation potential through the development of energy efficient appliances and the use of low GWP refrigerants. The emissions mitigation scenario were based on several drivers such as population growth, rates of urbanization, climate change, economic growth, etc. The other important element of the NCP is the development of policies where an integrated policy approach was needed for success, mainly setting the development of standards such as maps, as mentioned earlier, such as maps, labels for energy efficiency and low GWP refrigerants. In the NCP report, we developed or proposed maps for actually two major items where we think Lebanon is the major consumption of energy in Lebanon. One of them is the domestic refrigerators, and the other one is the unitary air conditioning units. We have started with actually a relatively low maps, which is like 7G for the domestic refrigeration, and H for a unitary air conditioning system, or we call it split units. This is relatively below the current EU levels, and maybe in the US as well. However, this strategy will allow industry to adjust, particularly the low manufacturers, the local manufacturers. Those proposed maps and labels were designed in allowing the local market to grow, and definitely will lead to a big energy saving opportunity for the whole country. The funding and incentive schemes will be implemented over a timely number of steps, of course, such as a startup fund, later on a full-scale funding, and maybe some strategy for using those funds. Lastly, integrating the NCP into Lebanon's priorities will significantly contribute to Lebanon's NDC targets. Well, now we have the tools. However, the COVID-19 crisis worldwide and in Lebanon, as well as you all know, we have some political, economical, and social unrest in the country since last year. This is slowing down the opportunity to take the next step. All the best, and I wish you to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazen. Let's move to Brian Dean, who's the Energy Efficiency and Cooling Lead at Sustainable Energy for All. SE for All has developed a cooling needs assessment. Why is this important? And how can countries use it to develop or strengthen their national cooling action plans? Brian?
Great. Thanks, Lori. And yeah, SE for All has developed a needs assessment tool, and I think I've got some slides that could be shown. We've developed this tool actually in collaboration with Toby, who we'll hear from next, from the University of Birmingham. And you know, what we've found, of course, is that historically, when we're talking about cooling, we often get the cooling appliance industry involved, and you know, very much oftentimes focus on equipment sales, economic growth, and population changes. But we're not often thinking about these broader cooling needs. And so if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see the three cooling for all needs are human comfort and safety, food, nutrition, and the agriculture side, and healthcare. When you actually think about these, you can actually start to then identify what the solutions are, and it's not always an appliance. And in fact, we say that sustainable cooling for all is not an air conditioner and refrigerator in every home. In fact, there's many other solutions that need to be used. So in order for these needs to be met, well, first we need to understand them, and that's what the Cooling for All Needs Assessment is about, actually looking at the information to identify what the needs are. And the approach is really to measure it and to be able to then put together a roadmap. Well, that's where we are right now. We have this opportunity to do national cooling action plans. That is the roadmap. That's the policy, technology, and finance options that we have to make sure that our countries are meeting the needs and on that race to zero, as Dan mentioned. We have over 1 billion people that are at high risk due to lack of access to cooling, and another 2 billion that are at medium risk due to lack of access to cooling. And these are people in hot locations around the world. We need to make sure that we're addressing their access to cooling, and the needs assessment can get us there. Next slide. So what we see on the human comfort side is, do we actually have adequate cooling in our homes? Are we sleeping well? Do we have adequate cooling in our schools, in our work environment? Are we productive and actually having cooling meet our needs for a better life? Same thing on food, nutrition, and healthcare. Do we actually are we having the nutrition to have a healthy life? Are the agriculture and fishery workers staying safe? Is there minimal food loss so that they can have their incomes? And of course, in this time of COVID, we're all very familiar with what's needed from a vaccine perspective. Are those vaccines going to make it to the last mile? Are they going to make it to the people that are vulnerable? Next. So, and next again. So what we see here is that when we're thinking about solutions, in fact, Lori mentioned at the beginning this reduce, shift, improve, protect, and leverage. And we shift protect to the beginning. We think if we're looking at access to cooling, we need to make sure that we're protecting vulnerable populations with reliable solutions, affordable solutions, and making sure that those solutions do reduce the need for energy, shift away from emittent pollutants and refrigerants, improve the efficiency and reduce the energy use in general, and then that we leverage all of us as partners, and we use this as a continuous cycle. Next slide. And just one more. There we go. So, and what we have here is there's 4 different buckets of technologies, of solutions. Technology, we have both passive solutions that reduce the need for cooling, but also active solutions that will shift away from inefficient technologies or high emissions from refrigerants. We also have services like cooling as a service, but also maintenance, which is a really important issue to reduce energy use. And then here we're talking about National Cooling Action Plans. Actually putting that policy in place is an important step. It's an important solution that all of our countries need to then have the maps and have the label solutions, policy solutions that, as I mentioned as well. And of course, finance. We can't do a lot of this without finance, and there are pay-as-you-go and other finance solutions specifically for cooling. So we see that doing the needs assessment will help set up the right information that's needed to address access to cooling, but also to project forward to a whole range of solutions. And so I'll leave it there and hand it back over to you, Laurie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I think that issue of the cooling chains with the vaccines coming out now is really an important one everyone's thinking about. So let's move to Toby Peters, who's a professor at the University of Birmingham and a leading expert on cold chains. So Toby, we're in the middle of a pandemic and cold chains are becoming a really hot topic. How are the NCAPs connected to the need for better cooling chains?
Thank you. And yes, I'm doing a lot of work on this at the moment. So at Heriot, working with Sustainable Energy for All, as you heard from Brian, we launched earlier this year a deep dive cooling for all needs assessment and country scale cooling action plan methodology, absolutely aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's designed to capture the full set of data, which is critical, and provide the process from that to design the clean cooling strategies, delivering cooling for all. As Brian said, I think for a government to ensure that the cooling needs of their population will be met equitably and sustainably, including for the most vulnerable, you've first got to understand what these needs are, not simply the growth projections. And we've already used our needs assessment in a series of markets, looking at cold chains for food and vaccines and wider rural cooling demands. And we're currently using it in Bangladesh for COVID-19 cold chains. So, for example, how much cold chain will be required to hit the target, say, of enabling farmers' incomes to double or to end hunger and malnutrition? How much cold chain is needed to provide access to vaccines, not just for newborn children, but as we're seeing today, for potentially vaccinating 60, 70, maybe 80% of the world's population, 5.5 billion people, twice, so maybe 11 billion vaccines. And underestimation of the scale of that demand, therefore its impact on energy consumption, will contribute, I think, to a lack of ambition in policies, infrastructure, and technology development, which will have or could have far-reaching social, economic, and environmental consequences. And specifically, I think one point that's very important is that by making these needs assessments actually being needs-driven, rather than equipment-based projections, you can address two major challenges. First of all, the failure to capture needs. So equipment-based growth projections don't start by seeking to understand how much needs and gaps, or address how much demand for cooling solutions will be shaped by these needs. And likewise, a focus on per capita equipment penetration rates presupposes a top-down technical solution to cooling needs and risks, very much a business as usual, and we're seeing that with COVID-19 plans. But this approach ignores the possibility of demand mitigation, the redesign of systems, the aggregation of demand, modal shifts, the use of waste or currently untapped resources to solve these challenges. So for me, cold chains specifically have a complex set of challenges when conducting needs assessments. First of all, they're not single pieces of equipment, but a seamless process of multiple stages which need to protect the temperature integrity at all the stages with different energy consumption and available sources. They also have to account for wider transport and other infrastructure challenges. So in the case of COVID, in many countries, 50% of vaccination is outreach, where you have to get out into the remote communities. You've got to understand that challenge. And while the quantum of expansion may be estimated considering population sizes, this ground level condition need to sustain such expansion needs to be fully understood. And so food, I also think, has a unique set of challenges, where alongside the goal of the need to feed the world, we actually need to understand a much more complex set of inputs. On the one hand, we need to feed the world, but also how do we create the local and global field to fork connectivity to, yes, nutritionally feed 10 billion people sustainably, but also harnessing and using hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers whose livelihood and well-being are often dependent on only 1 or 2 hectares, as well as sure that we do this sustainably. So you've got to understand these questions. And of course, with vaccines and COVID-19, the need to vaccinate a substantial portion of the world's population at rapid speed will require a new fast-track approach to assess, re-engineer, and build out the cold chain logistic assets for actually a volume and speed never before considered. There are, however, significant environmental risks associated with cold chain from the direct and the indirect emissions, which need to be recognised, assessed, and mitigate against. And so we need a whole systems approach to design environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable solutions, including modal shifts, harnessing synergistic thermal services that will not only support the efficient and equitable delivery of COVID-19 vaccination, but critically also contribute to their long-term cold chain and energy resilience with lasting legacy. This equipment is going to last 10 or 15 years, and it has to remain sustainable and useful. But equally, my final point is if we do get this adequate information and get it down to the community level, equally we can leapfrog to systems approaches as well, what I call community cooling hub. Delivering affordable and sustainable solutions that mitigate demand, harness all the energy resources, create multiple service systems, and also the thermal synergies between subcooling systems. But this all starts, though, with properly understanding the needs of access to cooling for all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Toby. It is a big challenge coming. I just want to remind you, if you have questions for any of the panelists, you can see the Q&A box. Please go ahead and put those in there, and if we've got time, we'll try to get to those. So now we've got a pretty clear overview of the National Cooling Action Plans and the need for them. Let's focus on the methodology that was developed by the Cool Coalition, KSEP, UNSCAP, and partners. So let's first talk to Ksenia Petrichenko, the Economic Affairs Officer at UNSCAP, for an introduction to the methodology. Ksenia?
Thank you very much, Laurie. Could we see my slides, please? It's my pleasure to introduce you to the methodology which UNSCAP and UN Environment started developing at the beginning of this year in the context of Cool Coalition, following the call from Antonio Guterres last year that all countries need to develop national cooling action plans to deliver efficient and sustainable cooling for all. And in this methodology, we wanted really to provide guidelines to the countries in order for them to be able to do it in the most efficient and flexible manner. And as we heard from a previous presentation, especially from a presentation from Dan, that commitments to Kigali Amendment are not enough. We really wanted to look at the methodology from a holistic perspective and also recognize that in order to really deliver sustainable cooling, we also need to deliver a number of sustainable development goals, as cooling is really cross-cutting issue and is connected to a number of SDGs. And also, it is very important for countries to integrate sustainable cooling as mitigation actions into the national determined contributions to make sure that sustainable cooling actions are contributing to achievement of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. So we heard about the importance of NCAPs, but just to emphasize how comprehensive the cooling sector is, it's really cross-cutting sector. It has a complex nature, multiple and intersecting subsectors are part of it. The institutional responsibility in any given country is usually very scattered. There is not one single agency which is responsible for all aspects of cooling. So it really requires engagement of diverse stakeholders and aligning different interests and agendas. So national cooling action plans are really the tools to make sure that all those policy agendas are aligned and the technical choices and solutions, as we heard from Toby, are aligned and integrated with energy efficiency, access to cooling, reducing environmentally harmful impacts of substances used in cooling, and also maximizing the social and economic benefits. So we really try to capture those aspects in the methodology which we have been developing, and also building upon lessons learned from existing national cooling action plans and the work which is being done by a number of institutions in the field, bringing together different actors required to increase effectiveness of actions on sustainable cooling in this comprehensive approach. Next slide, please. So we totally recognize that development of any NCAP for any country is a significant undertaking. We know that a number of NCAPs have been published already in many countries, and it's a great progress. It's a great learning source. So in the methodology, which my colleagues from IEEE will be talking more in details in the next presentation, we really try to build upon the experience from different countries and what the process they came through during development of their NCAPs in order to put together the guiding principles and a toolkit for any country to use in order to develop the NCAP. But there are many challenges on the way, of course. There is a need for significant public and private sector collaboration. So definitely the commitment from the government is the key, and commitment to really improve sustainable cooling in comprehensive manner. And engagement from the private sector and solutions providers is also crucial. The process is resource intensive, both in terms of financial resources as well as human and technical capacity. Data availability is usually a common challenge in most of the countries who attempt to start the process of developing the NCAP. So in the methodology which we are putting together, we really try to address these issues and make sure that it is adaptable and flexible, and can be really tailored to any context of any country, depending on their policy interests, priorities, data availability, and resource availability. Next slide, please. We also made sure that we get inputs from all important experts and organizations who are active in the field and who has great experience in sustainable cooling and development of NCAPs already in countries. So as part of Cool Coalition, we established a working group specifically for National Cooling Action Plan development. And during this year, we have been really collaborating around putting together this methodology, getting the inputs from different organizations, which you can see on the slide, together with our colleagues from UN Environment, NCAP, KSAP, and AEEE, who is the core team, but also with contributions from C4All and University of Birmingham, UNIDO, CLASP, World Bank, Energy Foundation China, UNDP, and many others. It has been a really great collaborative process, and we're really happy to share some of the insights coming from this work. We also started this year 2 pilots, starting with a pilot in Cambodia, who is very much on the way on implementing and really testing this guiding framework for NCAP development. And we'll hear from Ministry of Environment of Cambodia in the following presentation. And we also started doing the same testing of this methodology in Indonesia, and we'll be happy to keep you posted on lessons learned from both countries from the ground in the future. It's really 2 different countries, and it will be very interesting to see how this methodology will be implemented in both of them and how we can tailor this comprehensive approach. So with that, I will hand back to Laurie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's really useful. So to give us some more details about this methodology, we have Sneha Sakhar and her colleague Satish Kumar from the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. The Alliance was a key organization in developing India's pioneering NCAP, and it is the most comprehensive one out there at this point and a major building block of the NCAP methodology that the Cool Coalition's been developing. Sneha and Satish, can you tell us about the development of that?
Thank you very much. I hope I am audible.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Cool Coalition, NCAP, and KSAP for according this opportunity to AEEE. And Ksenia has set the context for me to dive right into the presentation. Next slide, please. Can one size fit all? This was the million-dollar question that confronted the team as we strove to strike a balance between comprehensiveness and practicality. The key message that I would like to give to the audience is that national cooling action plans must be customizable for it to succeed across different regions and geographies. A country like India may want to adopt a very comprehensive and cross-sectoral approach, focusing not only on space cooling, but also mobile air conditioning and cold chain, whereas another country like, say, Vietnam or Dominican Republic may just choose to focus on air conditioning sector and their impacts on refrigerant use. How to immunize 1.4 billion people at an unprecedented scale and speed in an affordable manner is a top of mind issue for Indian policymakers and public officials, or to reduce the food loss by 20% can be part of the objectives that are set by different countries. What the team has been able to do while developing the methodology is to draw upon the shared experience of several national cooling action plans developers represented in the working group. And the idea that has been reinforced multiple times has been to propose a guiding principle rooted in flexibility. Next slide. So what are the foundational principles that we have incorporated in the NCAP methodology? While the methodology is providing high-level guidance, the NCAP development team should be able to exercise high level of discretion and flexibility to meet the country's unique context and needs. Some of the key ones are listed here, such as facilitating compliance with Kigali Agreement or Paris Agreement in the form of NDCs, supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, energy or electricity security, and thermal comfort for all to address access to cooling needs. A few others, such as the political and the manufacturing climate, availability of data, local capacity, resources, should be understood by the NCAP development team and the national entity responsible for developing the National Cooling Action Plan in a country. Next slide. Simplicity and logic as the cornerstone to the foundational principle for National Cooling Action Plan methodology development is the idea, which is to enable the countries to prioritize the steps and actions based on resource availability. A key element is that data collection must be kept simple. And I'm telling this from my personal experience of having development of the India Cooling Action Plan, because excessive data requests, we believe, is time and resource intensive and assumes a certain amount of capacity and domain expertise. And because government will try to verify and validate these data before it becomes part of any major policy document. Managing stakeholders and encouraging collaboration from the start, which is easier said than done. I mean, it depends on NCAP development team, responsible government entity, and the stakeholders representation in the committee to bring together the following 4 key pillars who will ensure a successful development of the NCAP. And these 4 entities are National Cooling Action Plan Development Team, domain experts and knowledge creators, government ministries, and the private sector. Next slide. So organizations and people who are part of this event would like NCAP to be holistic and comprehensive. But what about thinking from it from the perspective of policymakers who have to go through the process and develop the National Cooling Action Plan? What can we do? What is the best solution? So think holistically, but plan strategically. The key question to ask is, what is the opportunity cost of delayed action? Is it better to start early than to line up your ducks and do a mega NCAP in another 2-3 years? I think this is a simple recommendation that we are making, that time is of essence, and I think it's better to start as quickly as possible. Strike a balance between comprehensiveness and pragmatism and timeliness. Next slide. The last thing I want to highlight before I hand it over to my colleague Sneha to cover the NCAP methodology in some detail is to emphasize the importance of an integrated approach. This is an adaptation of what AEEE team calls lean, mean, and green strategy, that is emphasize the design aspect to reduce the cooling load requirement. If done well, it can reduce the load by almost 50%. Then meet the loads by the most energy efficient technologies that one can afford, and do it while keeping in mind both the passive and active cooling technologies. This is where the importance of refrigerants, green, natural, low GHG, will become critical. And not to forget the operation and maintenance practices, which will minimize refrigerant leakages, better recovery, and keep the air conditioning and refrigeration equipment and appliances running at peak efficiency. Next slide, and over to you, Sneha.
Thank you, Satish. So I'll walk us through the NCAP development methodology. Broadly, the process for developing an NCAP can be looked at in 3 sequential stages. Next slide, please. So here are the 3 sequential stages, each with its own set of steps. So broadly, the first stage entails a comprehensive cooling context mapping of the country. As part of the methodology toolkit, we've developed a data collection framework that guides this step. This assessment then helps determine the core elements and priorities of the NCAP, specific to the country. The second stage is all about quantifying the current and future cooling demands for the relevant sectors and deriving meaningful future pathways to sustainably address the cooling growth. This step involves extensive data analysis. And again, as part of the methodology, we have sector-specific data collection frameworks to guide this assessment. The third stage is where it all comes together into the actual NCAP report. This involves consolidating the sector-specific assessments into a cohesive nationwide cooling overview, identifying any cross-sectoral synergies, and establishing the goals and recommendations of the NCAP with broad buy-in. Throughout the process flow, as Satish mentioned, ensuring effective stakeholder engagement is really critical in order to achieve holistic outcomes and integrative benefits. While this methodology is under development, it is also being pilot tested for Cambodia's NCAP development, and Mr. Pak will be speaking about it shortly. Next slide, please. So for each of the three stages, I'll talk about the respective steps a little bit more in detail. The first is we start with country context mapping as the foundational step towards planning an NCAP. This forward-looking assessment should ideally encompass an understanding of the country's cooling needs as driven by the climate, the socioeconomic factors, the extent of met and unmet needs, international commitments, national priorities, and the current status of cooling across various sectors. Mapping the existing policies and programs that relate to cooling is an important part of this step. This comprehensive policy landscape helps identify synergies across the different areas of cooling and supports intergovernment alignment. Context mapping is also an opportunity for a country to look into what are its existing resources, knowledge base, and capacities in terms of developing an NCAP. Government databases, and particularly the knowledge residing within national ozone cells, can be an important resource to inform the country assessment. The next stage here is planning and pre-work for the NCAP. So the country assessment really helps inform the broad contours and key stakeholders for the country's NCAP. Identifying a nodal government entity that will drive the whole process going forward, this is an important step early on. In many countries, the ozone cell has become the logical go-to entity for driving the NCAP, as they own a lot of the relevant data by virtue of managing the HCFC phase-out plan. Other planning activities involve establishing a cross-functional teams, stakeholder engagement process, a team governance structure, and the timeline, et cetera, for the NCAP development. Next slide, please. Now we move into the cooling demand assessment. So here, the first thing to do is defining the current baseline, which is essentially a numerical definition of where the country is at in its cooling trajectory. The quantification of cooling demand can include metrics such as the extent of met and unmet cooling needs, the end-use energy consumption, carbon emissions, and the refrigerant demand. And then the next step is projecting future growth of cooling. And ideally, we want to look at two scenarios here. One is the business as usual, or the reference scenario, which looks at how the current baseline will evolve based on the ongoing level of efforts. And then the intervention scenario, which looks at how the cooling growth will evolve based on accelerated efforts across policy, technologies, and market enablers. And the delta between these two scenarios really helps inform the NCAP's recommendations. So the cooling demand assessment gives us an informed view into the impacts of future cooling growth, as well as the potential benefits through various interventions. This then helps identify the sector-specific priorities, including the quick wins and high-impact interventions, as well as the strategic longer-term interventions for the sector. The prioritization should take into account ease of implementation, potential impacts and benefits, and also leveraging synergies with existing government policies and programs. At the bottom of the steps here, you may notice some icons, and here we've tried to map. I mean, this is indicative and will vary from country to country for each of the NCAPs, but we've tried to indicate the key stakeholder entities that would be involved in each of the different steps. And as you can see, all of these steps tend to be highly collaborative. Next slide, please. Finally, we move into the integration aspect. This first involves an aggregation of the sector-specific analysis into cohesive countrywide view of cooling. and synthesizing this into NCAP goals and recommendations. The recommendations could span ambitious policy, push efficient technologies and refrigerant pathways, market enablers such as financing instruments and capacity building, just to name a few. At this point, obtaining alignment and buy-in amongst key stakeholders, and in particular government entities, is important to ensure effective implementation of the recommendations. A governance body such as a steering committee with representation from various ministries can be helpful in enabling this alignment. At this stage, some countries may also consider releasing a draft public comments for wider acceptance. And then the final step is to embed an implementation and governance framework into the NCAP to ensure the operationalization of the recommendations. Some key elements here include a monitoring protocol, as in who and how will the implementation progress be tracked? What are the key success factors? What is the process for recalibration of the NCAP, wherein the longer term recommendations can be reassessed as and when new information or technologies become available. This step really ensures that the resulting NCAP is a live document, an actionable roadmap that has ownership and a governance structure in place for guiding and monitoring future actions towards low climate impact cooling for all. Next slide, please. I'm ready to hand it back to you, Laurie, but just wanted to flash this quickly on the screen. This is a list of all the ongoing and completed NCAPs thus far.
Thank you,
Over to you,
Sneha.
Laurie.
Thanks very much. Finally, let's turn to Pak Suk Haravuth, the Deputy Director General of the General Directorate of Environmental Protection in the Ministry of Environment, Cambodia. Mr. Pak, it's a pleasure having you here. Tell us more about how the NCAP methodology is being piloted in your country.
Thank you, Loria. Hi, everyone. So that today I'm pleasure to meet you all and to present on the process of the NCAP in Cambodia. Next slide, please. Actually, Cambodia has been economic growth at the average rate of 7% except in 2020 due to the COVID-19. And by 2030, Cambodia electricity consumption is forecast to more than triple in comparison to the level of demand in 2015. And in 2017, the average estimate penetration rate of cooling equipment in Cambodia was about 2%. And considering country's steady economic growth and rising income, energy use of space cooling and refrigeration is bounded to increase due to the in the last 2 years is the economy have been developed so much. At the same time, Cambodia national determined contribution aimed at the 16% reduction of the greenhouse gas emission from the energy session in comparison to the business as usual scenario by 2030. In the intent of carbon emission reduction is for the support under the National Green Growth Policy 2013, National Green Growth Strategic Plan 2013-2030, and National Policy, Strategy and Action Plan on Energy Efficiency 2017. Next slide, please. Cambodia, in collaboration with UNEP and NCAP, have started the development of the National Cooling Action Plan in Cambodia in the context of a cooling coalition. So the NCAP will identify the comprehensive action to reduce energy use and emission from the emission of the cooling aligned with the plan related to emission from the refrigeration transition. And Cambodia is the first country to pilot the cooling coalition comprehensive methodology. NCAP for Cambodia will cover the following important cooling sector: space cooling in building, cold chain and refrigeration, including food and healthcare, mobile air conditioner, industrial processing cooling. And we also access to cooling in particular important for Cambodia as it is presently quite low across cooling sector, but it is likely to expand driven by economic growth and increased income. Next slide, please. So in the NCAP development process, we have 4 steps. So in September to October 2020, we are in collect high-level data to set the contact and guide the data collection for the sector, determine the scope and extent of the NCAP, focus to country-specific priority area, understand socio-economic implication, and from October to January 2020, so that the sector data collection, space cooling in building, cold chain and refrigeration, food and healthcare, mobile air conditioner, industrial process cooling. From January to March 2021, the data analysis combining data result and define the met and met national demand, project how the demand will grow and develop a scenario of ambitious policy to compare and identify the suitable and impactful policy intervention. And the last step is from February to April 2021, the NCAP draft and review. So the contextual and methodological chapter, policy recommendation chapter, and review by the steering committee will be conducted, and draft revision and submit for approval will be get the final stage. Next slide, please. So all the NCAP development will be collaboration from the key stakeholder as the following, so that the NCAP, the ESCAP, UN Environment Coalition will be here to comprehensive methodology for NCAP, technical guideline and support through the NCAP process, international expertise on sustainable cooling best practice and solution, like global network of partner and experts. And also at the national level, NCAP development, so that we have the Ministry of Environment led by Montreal Protocol implementation unit, stakeholder engagement for NCAP and data collection for NCAP. We have also the National Council for Sustainable Development, led on the NDC update and inclusion of sustainable cooling in the NDC, drafting the text of the NCAP based on the national measurement prepared by the international team. And also the Ministry of Land Management, Urban Planning and Construction will be developed the Cambodian NDC roadmap for building and construction 2020-2050. Passive cooling strategy considered for the include into the building regulation. That my end presentation. Thank you very much, and I give the floor for leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pak. Appreciate it. I think that we've gone a little bit long and we may not have time for questions today, but if you do have questions you'd like to have answered, you can send them to this email address, UNEP, UNEP -coolcoalition@un.org. Finally, let me hand over to Miriam Lilana Inostroza. Miriam's the head of the Global Climate Action Unit in the Energy and Climate branch of UNEP. Miriam, pleasure to have you here. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lori, and the organizing team for this opportunity to participate in this encouraging session. Thanks to all presenters for their highly valuable contributions on highlighting the holistic nature of cooling. The session was very comprehensive. I enjoyed it very much. Speakers walk us through the context of the National Cooling Action Plans, an actual example by Lebanon, and cooling needs assessment tool that can help countries to develop or strengthen their NCAPs. Equally important was the presentation of the NCAPs methodology, which uniqueness I found lies on its comprehensiveness and applicability and its simplicity and logic. More importantly, the session included a successful piloting of the NCAP methodology by Cambodia. So the team definitely planned to succeed, to respond to Dan's quote, and if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. I like that quote very much. So I would just like to highlight 3 important key messages. Key message number 1, we cannot afford short-term trade-offs between sustainability and economic growth. Climate change has not stopped because of COVID-19. GHG concentrations in the atmosphere are at record levels and continue to increase. We are seeing that emissions are heading towards pre-pandemic levels following a temperature decline caused by lockdown and global economic slowdown. However, according to a report released last month by UN, we are set to see the warmest 5 years on record in a trend that is likely to continue, which means that we are not on track to meet agreed targets to keep global temperature increase well below 2 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial levels, much less the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we consensually acknowledge that this has been an unprecedented year for people and the planet. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected lives worldwide. At the same time, the heating of our planet and climate disruptions has continued apace. More than ever, we need sustainable solutions to tackle the climate crisis and achieve sustainable development. Key message number 2, national cooling action plans can help countries map cooling needs and identify key actions to fill gaps in a sustainable manner. As we have heard today, national cooling action plans are effective tools to tackle the cooling challenge. NCAPs can help countries identify gaps in cooling access, study present and future trends, and decide what actions should be taken to address these gaps in a sustainable manner. We've heard today that effective NCAPs are developed based on tight collaboration between a vast range of stakeholders from different sectors. This collaboration is fundamental as cooling issues are cost-cutting. NCAPs help tackle cooling challenge cohesively, avoiding the danger of addressing the issues in silos. NCAPs can also help identify the best tools and policies to accelerate the transition to global warming potential and highly efficient cooling, including through minimum energy performance standards, efficient energy efficiency labeling, building codes, passive cooling solutions, enhancement of sustainable cold chains, and so forth. NCAPs are a tool to support countries in improving access to cooling services, including cold chains for food and medicines, and therefore address several sustainable development goals. We have also heard today that NCAPs can help identify opportunities to incorporate efficient cooling into enhanced nationally determined contributions and serve as the basis for climate finance. These plans can also help in advancing the compliance of Kigali Amendment and to progress the work on SDGs. In short, comprehensive NCAPs are fundamental tools for countries to address the climate challenge and ensure green recovery. Finally, a key message number 3, ongoing action is worth the price, but more countries should develop NCAPs. Today, we recognize and celebrate the great effort on developing NCAPs from countries all around the world. These include India, China, Rwanda, Trinidad and Tobago, Cuba, Lebanon, Kenya, Barbados, Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and soon enough, Cambodia and Indonesia. We also recognize the work of international stakeholders and experts that are supporting countries in this process, including those that's presented today, UNDP, UNEP, Sustainable Energy for All, CLASP, the World Bank Group, UNESCAP, KSEP, and IEE. However, much more work is needed to ensure that our need for cooling work with nature and not against it. We are hopeful that the holistic methodology developed within the framework of the Cool Coalition will help countries and implementers develop effective and comprehensive NCAPs. We call on our zone officers and country representatives that are listening us today to be the actors of change on cooling. You're perfectly placed to kickstart and lead the development of NCAPs in your countries, and Cool Coalition members are ready to support your efforts. Together, we can bring real and positive change for our planet while improving the lives of billions of people. Thank you very much again to everyone, to the team for their hard work on developing and piloting NCAP's methodology. This has been such an energizing session on tackling the cooling challenge and an excellent example of teamwork, a team effort, work, synergy, and collaboration. So thank you very much to all for this great work and great session. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. It has been really interesting. And I mean, the planet is warming and the vaccines are coming, and all of this is very timely. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. That's the end of the session. You can see a few of the contacts there. I've also put into the chat the email you can email to try to get copies of the slides if you like them, or if you have any other questions that need to be addressed to people who've spoken today. So thank you for joining.